I have never been one to pay close attention to the news. In fact, I find the whole concept to be quite exhausting. Be it local, national, or even global, bickering and mudslinging always take priority over the facts. I, for one, don't feel the need to have my ideas challenged in the first place. I've always found open-mindedness to be a bit overrated. Long story short, I don't have time for those kinds of games. I decided long ago that I'd simply tune out the noise and go about my own business. As you can imagine, this approach worked like a charm. While those around me began losing their minds over politics and current events, I slept like a baby. This approach worked perfectly, and I was able to keep my nose clean. Until recently, that is. It all began a couple of months ago when I was approached about overseeing an upcoming expedition to the wreckage of the Titanic. The offer was an easy one to accept. The man drove right up to the drive-through window that I was manning. Before I could even greet the man, he was heaping praise on me. It was evident to the guy that I was more than qualified to oversee the construction of a deep-sea submersible. Frankly, I didn't disagree with him. I knew my way around the fryers at the fast food joint that employed me. This new project surely wouldn't be any more difficult to navigate. At last, I was going to get the recognition that I deserved. After a handshake and a resignation letter, I was off to bigger and better things. Little did I know, I was destined for a front row seat to the largest news story in recent memory. Upon arriving at the site, I was debriefed on the details of the project. A group of 5 individuals had chartered a trip to see the wreckage of the Titanic. Each individual had already completed the 15-minute training course, so the expedition was a go. The company reported that they used to have a working submersible, but that it was no longer in use. My task was to construct a new sub from scratch, and I'd be working alone. The clock was ticking, and in order to ensure that the project would be completed in time, I was given creative control and a blank check to use on resources from the local Home Depot. The process was exhausting. The next 2 months consisted of more duct tape, hot glue, and thumbtacks than I had ever seen accrued in one area. As I was nearing completion of the project, I was informed that my duties would continue after the completion of the sub. I would be tasked with communicating with the crew as they descended to the wreckage. As I added the finishing touches to the sub, I shifted my attention to making the vessel interactive. There was only one way that the vehicle could be improved further: allowing the crew to navigate the thing with a PlayStation controller. I made a quick trip to the nearby Walmart Supercenter before purchasing the controller and returning to the site. I then tossed the controller into the small vehicle before turning around and leaving for the day. There was no need to waste my time on any wiring or programming. The mere presence of the controller in the sub was more than adequate to please the crew. My masterpiece was complete. The fact that I had taken 3 hours of my own time, stretched out over the course of the last few months, left me feeling impressed that I had completed the project in the first place. The next few days were set aside for me to meet the 5 crew members who would be taking the plunge. The first individual was a gentleman who went by the name of Mr. Sink Too Fast, a mathematician who had made waves in the field of probability. Accompanying him were 2 brothers, the first of which went by the name of Mr. Not in Time, the director of safety operations at a Fortune 500 company. The second being Mr. Out of Time, who worked in the field of risk assessment. The 4th crew member was a foreign businessman who went by the name of Mr. Implosion. The 5th and final member was none other than the CEO of our company himself, Mr. Huge Ass. With the formalities out of the way, the crew was ready to step onto the cutting edge of adventure, ready to do something that had only been done numerous times, continuously, for the last 4 decades. They would truly be joining rarefied air. As the final preparations were completed, the submarine was loaded onto the mothership and we set off into the North Atlantic. When inside the submersible, the crew would be responsible for checking in every 10 minutes throughout their descent. The only effective method of communication would be through text messages, which would come directly to me. Armed with the latest technology, I was eager to see how the sub was going to perform. Clusters of balloons were available for the crew to inflate when they were ready to ascend back to the surface. A bundle of sticks and a pad of matches were also placed inside in case the crew became cold. No expense was spared, and the moment was quickly upon us. The mothership had reached the waters above the wreckage of the Titanic. I watched as the crew piled into the submersible, expressing their excitement as they did so. It was time for the final touch on the submarine that I had created. A cluster of C4 charges placed right in the center of where the crew was sitting. I then sealed the thin film of plastic over the hatch, closing the crew inside. A single hole was left in the sub, just in case the members wanted to stick their head out for a better look at the wreckage once they were down there. Sing Too Fast then stuck his head out before thanking me again and disappearing into the vessel once more. It was thrilling to be a part of such an exciting event. The large crane positioned on the stern of the ship began lifting the sub into the air. In mere minutes, the crew inside would be descending to a destination that only many, many others had been to before. I watched as the crane maneuvered until it had the sub directly over the water. The vessel then began descending towards the waves. The moment that the vehicle came into contact with the surface of the water, I was thrown to the ground with such force it left me disoriented for several moments. My eyes stung and my skin turned red as a tremendous heat hit me like a freight train. My surrounding environment became so bright, it was as if the sun itself was hovering over the waters next to me. When I was able to force my eyes open again, I stood up before peering out to the water where the sub had previously been. A large mushroom cloud-shaped plume had replaced the spot where the sub had stood just minutes before. Before I could process what I was seeing, the floor beneath me gave way. I, along with the tattered remains of the mothership, descended into the icy waters. They say hindsight is 20/20. Placing the C4 charges within the sub was likely a miscalculation. There are rumblings that the United States Navy detected the blast days ago, but I'm not so sure. Color me skeptical that they could detect something so minor, but I digress. I'm told the only reason I survived the blast is because of my thick plot armor, but I know the truth. I'm one of a kind, a diamond in the rough. I'm still alive today because of sheer will. I never back down from a fight. I never crack under pressure. Unlike the submersible, I guess. Total side note, but I have always admired the US government. They stand tall as a model of decency and efficiency. In fact, they have already approached me about a new project they want me to work on. Something about designing a rocket for NASA. The Challenger 2.0, I believe they're calling it. The project begins tomorrow, and I'll be starting from scratch again. My favorite part that I incorporated into the sub was the hole I left for the crew to poke their heads out of when they got to the bottom. Nothing like that had ever been attempted before. It's a shame they didn't get to utilize it. Anyway, I think I'll incorporate the same idea into the rocket ship. Wish me luck.